Now, it's my distinct pleasure to take a couple of minutes to introduce Ken D. Ken is from the old country, Brooklyn, New York, and when the committee, we're talking about the committee for the MauiFest, and haven't they done a great job? They told me when they wanted me to do this to be myself. And then they gave me this packet of instructions on how to be myself, 42 pages worth. They told me, mostly have fun, so I'm going to do my best to be myself. Picked Ken up at the airport, and we had a nice lunch, and we went over to the Dunes Country Club and ate and talking a little bit and talking football and all that. And then we're sitting in the lobby there after lunch, relaxing a little bit. And I was telling Ken that what I just relayed to you, that when the committee asked me to do this gig, that they told me, tone it down a little bit, keep a lid on it. And then somehow Ken and I got talking about Bhagavan Sri Rajneesh and cosmic tantric sex and all this stuff. And I said, Ken, they told me to keep a lid on, and then they're going to bring Ken up here and do his mystical, magical thing. He told me just a little intro that he's going to focus on the sexual aspects of sobriety tonight. So just so that you know, if you're offended, well, good. If you're easily offended, Juan, get out now. The great news is that somebody mistook Ken and I for brothers the last evening, and if I had a brother like Ken, I would certainly be proud. We haven't spent a whole lot of time together, but there is that bond and heart connection of alcoholic to alcoholic, and especially, as I say, that New York connection. So I'm going to bring up Ken D. and enjoy yourselves this evening.
Hi, my name is Ken, and I'm an alcoholic. It's good to be here. I'm glad we got started, huh? This is good. I want to have the awards here for the Brooklyn participants. For first place, we got Ronnie making it to the corner, being chased by a police canine in 3.6 seconds, and that's a new record for Brooklyn. This is an amazing place, Maui. It's kind of like New York in a way. It's an island surrounded by water. Except we learned to swim in the East River, and when you come up out of the water there, you go like this. But I'm really glad to be here. This is a great place. I want to thank Tammy and the committee and all the folks who were involved in getting us over here. This was a lot of fun. Dave picked me up at the airport, as he said, but he left something out that was very important. The vehicle he was driving. He told me to come outside after I picked up my luggage and look for a police interceptor. That's what he drives, It's blue with a big for sale sign, so I know he's alcoholic. And I figure this is great. I'm being picked up by an ex-cop who's trying to unload some hot vehicle. And, I'll be in the islands for 11 minutes and get arrested. And then he said to me, would you mind visiting with a friend of mine? And I said, no. He said, he's not going to be able to make it to the convention, and he really enjoys you. So he said, it's a little bit out of our way, or it's on our way, and so we'll just do that. I said, oh, that's terrific. He said, yeah, he's at a pawn shop. So I'm figuring, well, I got Carol, So we watch a movie or two or something, and then, we'll go on to the meetings. But it was PAWN porn. It was he was at a pawn shop. So we stopped by to see Tuna, and we said hello to him, and we had a quick visit. I love being an Alcoholics Anonymous, and I love to stand behind one of these things and not have to enter a plea. It's always I enjoyed all the speakers and workshops and everything. I feel much more informed than when I got here, I'll tell you that. It's an amazing thing because in Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill and Bob get credited with stuff that if they ever knew they were getting credited with it, they'd say, "You got to be kidding me." I had absolutely nothing to do with this. Can you imagine when Bill and Bob were getting together to form Alcoholics Anonymous, they'd be talking about, well, first we got to have some golf tournaments. I think we should focus on that to get us launched, How about the hole-in-one or closest to the pin, If you're an alcoholic, the closest to the pin you get is when you pull it and hold it, That's about the closest to the pin. I got through school totally unscarred by education, so you're not going to hear a lot of really good parlance out of me, that's for sure. And the other thing is that I'm always in awe of people who can remember right down to the time they took their first drink, and what it did to them. I don't fall into that category. Most of the things I remember most vividly never happened. And and the rest of it was like a dream, I was like an absentee landlord in my own life for many years, people used to talk about reality, and I thought, hey, it's once in a while do a drive-by, but you wouldn't want to take up residence there, I grew up in Brooklyn, and I grew up at a time, and I only say this so that you understand that I never used a drug in my life, legal or illegal. Now, that isn't to give me some special distinction. It's because I grew up in Brooklyn in the 40s and early 50s, and it was run by the mafia. The 5 mafia families lived within blocks of each other in Brooklyn at that time. And they had a little deal. The first time you used drugs in our neighborhood, they'd open a car door and close it on your hand. That's like no tolerance, And then if you did it again, we'd say, "Hey, what happened to Vinny?" He'd say, "I think he moved to Jersey." Know what I mean? You were like MIA, missing in action. Nobody ever had to worry about seeing Vinny again. And I got through school and hung out with guys then who were totally unscarred by education just like me. And I hang out with those same guys today, and it's really good because then your own stupidity goes totally unnoticed. I went to school with a guy, Tony. The teacher said to him, "How do you spell Mississippi?" And Tony said, "You mean the river or the state?" In my group, you say there's a dead bird, we look up. That's just the way we are. And as I said, it was a typical mafia neighborhood. Somebody say, "How far is it to the subway?" We say, "We don't know. Nobody's ever made it." We don't know. And they would say things like, "Hey, he fell asleep in the trunk of a car. He deserved to be shot." What the hell? Why wouldn't you shoot him? And I come from a family where, in my family, we're divided into 2 groups. Either you're in AA or you need AA. I'm a real alcoholic, and I don't know if you know what that means to you, but I know what it means to me. I drank stuff that not only hit the spot, it removed it. It just took it away. Some people see the glass and say it's half full. Some people say it's half empty. I always said, "Hey, it's too small." And the deal is that I always had a good idea. It never really manifested itself the way I thought it would, but I always had good ideas. I had so many good ideas that when my dad died when I was very young, and my mom had 7 kids, and I was the youngest of them. And we all had the same problem. My mom didn't drink, but she had 7 kids who did. And she'd say, "The only time you kids say no to a drink is if you misunderstood the question." In the city at that time, we had Schaefer beer, and I used to go to see Brooklyn Dodgers play baseball at Ebbets Field. Yay! L.A. Dodgers. It sounds like it's Disneyland. throw the ball, But we used to go over to Ebbets Field, and they were sponsored by Schaefer, and their logo was Schaefer, the one beer to have when you're having more than one, and we always knew we were having more than one, that was just the deal. And so my mom used to look at the can of Schaefer, and she said, I don't know what they put in here that makes you act so stupid, and I just started drinking when I was a kid. I mean, my brother was a bartender at a place called Murphy's Bar. And in New York at that time in the 40s, you could drink if you were 18 years old. So, as soon as you could get your change up on the bar, you could drink. And I used to stop by my brother's bar after school and have a few drinks, play cards, and shoot darts. And I learned right away that it was a good way of life, The guys there knew everything. They were all unemployed, and they had plenty of time to focus on what was really important in life. And they were always encouraging you, like, what the hell you doing going to school? Is it part of your parole or what? So the deal is that, that's just the area we grew up in. And it was a good little area. And I had guys that I hung out with. I started running numbers when I was a kid because my mom needed the money. And she was from a different time and place at that time. They didn't have welfare in New York at that time. They called it public assistance. And my mom, the lady, came and said, you're eligible for public assistance because your husband's dead and you got all these kids. And my mom only had like a 6th, 7th grade education. And my mom said, we don't need that. That's for the people who can't work. In this house, we all can work. And I'm like, hey, Mom, take some of the money. You know what I mean? But the deal is that so we all went out and started doing something. And I learned in New York, it's a very simple way of life. And that is when a man with experience meets a man with money, the guy with the experience ends up with the money, and the guy who had the money ends up with an experience, And so I got out in the fast lane. I was over there tonight watching the dances and stuff at the luau. And I'm thinking, every culture has its own sound. Like there they were talking about the aha baliha. And that's like, it's the call of passion, the call of passion. In a bar, it's last call. That's you get your drink and your passion at the same time. Oh, I got to try, And there are sounds that go with every culture. I notice over here there's a lot of bird sounds. In my neighborhood, it was, And when you heard that sound, you knew what it meant. Get down, get down. And so we grew up we thought we had a basic kid, growing up. And as I said, I went to school. When I was in high school, I had some problems. I was court ordered to a psychiatrist. I had some anger issues. The coach, I had gotten to play football. For some reason, I was always good at sports. I just had a natural thing for sports, and I had a lot of speed at that time. So I was always going to be a running back, and I ran back punts and kickoffs and stuff. And I was playing in a high school game. I was a sophomore playing varsity ball, and they ran a trap play, and there was a guy, a linebacker, who all game long, every time he got me down, he'd give me a shot or two. And in this particular moment, I came through the line, and one of the linemen just leveled this guy. So I put my foot in his chest and stepped on him and went over him. And I got about 2 or 3 yards, and that felt so good, I made a U-turn and came back and stepped on him again. And they thought there's something wrong with this guy, So I was court ordered to a psychiatrist because I was getting into a little trouble. And when I went to see this psychiatrist, he was asking me questions like, what are you thinking about right now? So I made something up. And he said, no, seriously, what are you thinking about right now? And right at that moment when he was asking me that question, what I was really thinking is, if my knees bent the other way, what would chairs look like? And I was smart enough to know not to give him that, Otherwise, you might have a whole different speaker here tonight. That's for sure, you know. But that's the way my mind went. You know, it was like my mom would walk into the room, and if we had a little 12-inch Admiral television at that time, and if it was turned off, she'd tell me to turn it on. Unlike parents today who say, turn off the TV, my mom would say, turn it on. You know, she didn't want me thinking, you know. You know, the 3 words you never want to hear an alcoholic say is, I've been thinking, you know. You know it's paramount to disaster, you know. You know, when an alcoholic says that, you might as well have a drum roll and say, now let the games commence, you know, like, you know, because what sounds good up here, when it comes out, other people look at you like, ooh, you know, the hamster's dead, but the wheel is still turning, you know, like whoa, you know, they got this look on them like, yo, did that come out of you, you know, and that's your best thinking, you know, wow, that's great. And I was going along. I married a woman who was so normal, it was pathetic. You know, we all proposed with 2 words at that time in Brooklyn. You're what? You know, so. And was very romantic, and then she was perfectly normal, but she didn't seem to understand me a whole lot. And I had met her in college, and she was from a small farming community, and here I was, a Brooklyn boy going to a major university in Pennsylvania. So she didn't understand me. She would actually say things to me like, that's your second drink. And I would always respond with, you know, quick answers like, hey, honey, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and finish your breakfast. You know, like, don't get caught up in my life. You got a lot going on here with the Cheerios, you know, like, you know. But she was so normal that it was very, very scary. I came home one time from the city, and the stock market had taken its biggest downturn, and I was drinking some shooters, and she said, what are you doing? I said, I'm having some shooters. She said, why? I said, the stock market had its biggest down day in the history of the stock market. And she looked at me like only she could, and she'd say, we don't own any stock. You know, like, you know. How can you negotiate with somebody like that? You know, like there's no. I would stand there and I would try to think of an answer to these very inquisitive kind of questions she would ask. You know, like, and my mouth would want to move, but I didn't know what to say. You know. And anyway, I went through grade school, high school. I was fascinated with young women. You know, when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, my sponsor told me this is a 2-fold disease: whiskey glasses and women's asses. And when I got here, I thought, you know, he was absolutely right, because as a freshman in high school, I played basketball, and I played on the freshman team, and I was a 94% foul shooter. And then my sophomore year, I started playing on the varsity basketball team in my high school, and people thought, geez, you know, this kid's going to set the record for the all-time best foul shooter in the school. Except they assigned a senior cheerleader to me. She had a ponytail and a really, really nice pleated skirt and a big megaphone and saddle shoes and a sweater that was to die for, you know. And I started going to the foul line in my sophomore year, and she would grab that megaphone and she'd say, up in the air, over the rim, come on, D, put it in. I started missing the backboard. You know, I was like, I didn't care where the ball went. You know, like, hey, you know. they benched me, like they said, come on, But that's just the way it was. I had a focusing attention. I had all the poise of a hemophiliac going through a razor factory. I was like, I never knew what was going to happen. And you didn't want me to form a party that was going to lead you anywhere, If you were following me, you were in big trouble. Because, one of the best lines in one of the best movies I ever saw was Cool Hand Luke, where Paul Newman is escaping for the last time, and George Kennedy jumps on the running board, and he says, "You're so cool, Luke." He said, "What's the plan?" And Paul Newman looks at him and says, "I've never had a plan in my whole damn life," And that's the way I was. I would just it would sound good, I'd go and do it. I'd be right in the middle of a bad idea and get a worse one. It would just, and in my mind, and even when I got sober, it was the same way. I thought I could make money selling hearing aids over the telephone, telemarket hearing aids. My mind just had, that just operated on a different plane than most people. And when I finally got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I went through a series of events that everybody goes through, and I ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I remember going to my first meeting. My sobriety date is July 5th of 1970. And I remember, thank you. And I remember going to that first meeting, and the guy at the door, they always had greeters then, and the guy at the door said, "Newcomer." And that was before I knew how intuitive you were, And I said, "Yeah, I am." He said, "Come on." He said, "Newcomers want to sit up front. That's where the miracle takes place." And God knows I was really looking for the miracle, I said, "Oh, yeah, let me sit up front. I want to be where the miracle is, And it never occurred to me that I was wearing a blue wool suit. And it was July 5th. And everybody else was in shorts. And that's why they knew I was a newcomer, And I remember after the meeting, they said, "Come on, we go to coffee." And I went with these 6 guys to coffee. And they put you in the booth in the diner. And it's like penitentiary time, they put you in the back where you can't get out till everybody else leaves. And there were 2 plumbers, a priest, an attorney, and a guy with the FBI. And I'm thinking, this is what it comes down to. This is the way I'm winding my clock. This is how I end up. And the guy who was the plumber, like Pearl said today, in the old days, they didn't wait for you to ask for a sponsor. This guy said, "I won't be your temporary sponsor." He said, "And you're in luck, And I looked at this guy, He had a head that looks like it wore out 2 bodies. And I'm looking at him going, wow, did I really pull the wild card here? Whoa, And this is so exciting, I was beginning to feel like I had all the luck of Job, oh, come on. So he said, "You're going to come to my house and we're going to do things together." And I said, "Fine." I was living with my mom at that time in a senior citizen place. And my wife and kids had left the state for their own sanity. My mom's place served her with a notice that I would have to get out because it was just really for senior citizens. But I was there so long I could use the walker. I was getting good. And all I did was plan my life and watch TV, And I'd sit there and I'd watch the cartoons, the Flintstones. And I'd watch the Flintstones. And then one day, I don't know, I had been separated 6 months from my wife, and I looked and I thought, Wilma's got a cute ass. I just looked up, Now, don't get me wrong, not as nice as Mrs. Jetson, but really, really nice, And so anyway, I ended up having to get out of this place, and I moved into my own place, and my sponsor was bringing me over to his house, and he was trying to keep me close to him because he knew I was going to need a lot of attention if I was going to stay sober. Because I had been in a little trouble with the law before I got sober because I was finding things before people officially lost them, and anyway. he said to me, you come on over to my house, and he'd have a little tedious job for me, but he always gave me a meal, and that was his way of keeping me involved. And we did that for about 3 weeks. And then one night, they had just come out in '69 with these 9-passenger station wagons. And the last 2 seats looked out the back. And Fast Eddie and I always had to sit in the back seat, And I said to him, how come I got to sit in the back seat all the time looking out? And he said, I want you to see the wreckage of your past, So there's one night we're sitting there, we just finished eating, and the phone rings, and he said to me, it's a 12-step call. I said, good, it's a 12-step call. And he said, we're going to have to go on it together, you and me. Oh, yeah, we'll go on the 12-step call together. I don't know what the hell he was talking about, But I'm in it. I'm going because this guy's done everything for me for 3 or 4 weeks. He's been really nice to me, and I don't want to let him down. So I said, good, let's go. So I get out to the car. I head for the back. He said, no, you can sit up front. I go, whoa, this thing's starting to pay off already, So we go up to this house, and like all houses in the city, brownstones in the city, you can't find a parking spot. You just can't find a parking spot. So he says to me, can you go get this guy? And I said, sure, I can get this guy. What? I mean, I'm an alcoholic. I'm not retarded, He said, no. He says, you got to go and get this guy, and we take him to the meeting, and we can start him like we did you on the road to recovery. Good. So I get out of the car, and as he tells the story, he goes around the block, and when he comes back, he pulls up, and I have the guy on the ground. And I'm beating him with a garbage can lid. Sometime between the guy had made the call and I got there, he changed his mind. Which I have found out today he was entitled to, But at this particular time, I was not aware of that. And this was the first time anyone had said, this is what you got to do, so, And now, hey, sometimes when you tell that story, people get the wrong idea. It wasn't abusive. I hit him maybe 2, 3, 4 shots maybe, And I honestly believe that if Packy didn't get here, that guy looked to me like he was surrendering, like he was... I heard him say twice after the second shot, please, I'll go anywhere. I'll do anything. So, I knew it was a program of attraction, and trust me, this guy was getting attracted after every shot. And so he whistled me into the car like I was a canine, And so I get in the car, and we start down the road, and anyway, as he was quick to do, he looked over at me, and he said, I want you to do me 2 favors. I said, sure. He said, first, I don't want you to consider that a 12-step call. And he said, secondly, don't tell anybody I'm your sponsor for a while. I think we're going to need to see how this thing works out, So I was going to these meetings, and I'm not wearing a blue suit anymore, but at every meeting I go to, they know I'm a newcomer. And I'm thinking, this is getting old. I got this little red name tag that they gave me, Ken, and I'm wearing it to the meetings, and then I'm there almost like 2 months. And one night I'm looking around the room, and I see that everybody in the room has a blue name tag. I have a red name tag. So when the meeting was over, I went up to the secretary. I said, hey, yo, I was good at AO and then, hey, yo. Why? I said, I have a red name tag. Everybody else has a blue name tag. So he said, Ken, you ready for a blue one? He took it off, put it on. Hey, you can't slip too much past me. I only took 2 months to catch on to this, So after that, I was one of the gang. And the first thing he did was he got me into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And as Doug went through last night, there's a lot of good stuff in there. But as I was going through that book, the thing that became real apparent to me was I kept getting evicted from my hiding places. As each page turned, I was being evicted from a hiding place because I had become someone who I really wasn't. You know, there was a guy at our group who used to say to me all the time, Ken, be what you is and not what you ain't. Because if you is what you ain't what you is. And I figured if someone said that to me in high school, I could have made it. You know, like I really could have made it. You know? I just needed that kind of direction. Somebody telling me that kind of stuff. You know, I didn't need the rest of the stuff. I just needed that real concrete learning kind of stuff. You know? And it's just I just needed a lot of hands-on. I was one of those guys who needed a lot of hands-on in Alcoholics Anonymous. And, you know, it's an amazing thing how this thing works out. Even this speaking thing. You know, Glenn is over here doing the taping. And, you know, this taping thing is a phenomena in Alcoholics Anonymous. We have a baseball field in San Diego, Petco Park. And I went there to a game, and I'm watching a game. And I go with the company on the company tickets. And I'm not a big baseball fan, as I said, since the Dodgers left Brooklyn. You know, I'm not a big baseball fan. And so when I go to the game, it's a night out with the guys. And usually I'm talking and we're having fun. And I'm talking about dopey things, like the Giants were playing and they had a pinch hitter and his name was Tony Tatada. And I'm going, Tony Tatada, I sure hope he can't get a hit. You know what I mean? You know, like I'm carrying on like a fool. And I'm there with one of the new executives of the company. And this guy in front of me turns around and says, you're Ken D. And I said, how do you know that? He said, I recognize you from your tapes. And I said, oh. So we started talking, and the executive from the company, after the guy turned around, he said, Ken, he said, I know from the owners of the company that they know your background, that you had some interesting youth. And I said, yeah, I did. He said, you got to remember now, I'm a real alcoholic. And he said, can I ask you a personal question? And I said, sure. And this is a Friday night now. He said, can I ask you a personal question? I said, sure. What do you want to ask me? He said, did you used to do porno flicks? And I said, I really don't want to go into that right now. You know, like I said, we'll talk about that another time. So, of course, I let him get through the whole weekend, and, man, did he track me down Monday. You know, like Monday I'm in the office, he comes in, he closed the door, he said, Ken, I got to ask you, you know. So I told him, I said, no, that's wonderful. But I was thinking, you know, John Holmes, wherever you are, eat your heart out. You know, like this is, you know, this is interesting stuff. So you just never know who's going to hear this stuff. You just never know who's going to hear this stuff. But anyway, Packy got me started on the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I started going through the book. I started taking other people to meetings, and I started doing all that stuff that you do. And as the big book says, when we drink, when the alcoholic drinks, something happens. And when the alcoholic stops drinking, something happens too. And a lot of time, it takes a while for you to have a clue as to what's going on. I have a lot of opinions, most of which don't mean anything. But I have a lot of experience, which for me means a lot. And that experience has allowed me to get into situations, see what was going on, realize a lot of times that I just didn't have a clue. I didn't have a clue what reality was. You know, I didn't have a clue what reality was. You know, Doug mentioned it, Mary Pearl mentioned it today. I know this adrenaline thing. I was on adrenaline rushes all the time. You know, my deal was, let's go do something. You know, even if it's wrong, let's go do it. You know, I don't care. My brothers and I used to get let's go get a couple of drinks and get arrested. You know, like, let's go do something. You know, like, we were never sitting around. I was born to be a verb. You know, I'm not a noun. You know, You know, my saying is leap before you look. You know, just get out there and do it. As I said, so what's the worst that can happen? You're right in the middle of a bad idea and you say, hey, you know, I should have thought about this. You know, like, this is like a crazy idea. But it never bothered me to get involved in stuff. And I always got involved in stuff. And my mother used to tell me as a little kid, MYOB, mind your own business. I never knew how to mind my own business. If you were doing it and it bothered me, it was my business, And I was very territorial. I'd go to the bathroom in a bar, and I'd leave my seat, and then I'd end up in the emergency room at 2:00 in the morning, and somebody stitching me up would say, "How did this happen?" I left my seat, and I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, somebody had taken my seat, And usually I would start by questioning their ancestry, did your parents have any kids that lived, And then the guy would start to get angry, and I would say things like, I can see you have a lot of anger issues. Hey, just because your mom didn't know your dad, don't take it out on me, And so I was always involved in good stuff in the bar, I knew how to get things going, I would walk into a bar and it'd be almost like a silent drum roll. He's here, and the deal is that a lot of times you just never knew what was going to happen. But I always wanted to be in the middle of it. So I got the same way with Alcoholics Anonymous. I got in the middle of it. I just started doing this stuff. I just had a whole bunch of experiences that I can't even begin to tell you, because when you tell them, they don't mean anything. But I ended up having to go. The grand jury found me guilty of something, and I had to go and appear in court. And before I appeared in court, I had to have a preliminary appearance at the courthouse in Brooklyn, Kings County Courthouse. There are about 285 attorneys there. And the guy who was handling my case was a guy I went to meetings with. And I walked in and I sat down, and he looked at me and he said, "Kenny D, I didn't know you did this." I said, "Hey, when we were riding around Sharon, I didn't know you did this." So we're starting out equal. And the deal is that we were able to work that stuff out. And to make a very long story very short, instead of going away for some amount of time, I made financial restitution for some of that stuff 20 years into my sobriety. And the deal is a lot of times it just wasn't comfortable to make that commitment and do that. And I'd go to my sponsor and say, "Why don't I just declare bankruptcy and, just forget about it? I've been doing it for 8 years now, 7 years." And he'd say, "You made a commitment to do this. You don't have to keep doing it. You can break your word. Who's going to care if you break your word? You want to lie? Go ahead and lie, So you break your word, you lie. So the guy can't count on you for what you said you were going to do, who you letting down? Nobody, I'll know about it, you'll know about it, but nobody else will know about it, this guy's tough, this guy's tough. But the deal was, I just did it. I just did it. And the same way when I was separated from my family, I used to call him, about 11 o'clock at night sometimes. I get really lonely, and I'd say, this isn't working for me. And he'd say, "Why?" I said, I can't see my wife. And he'd say, "Good for her. She deserves a break, And, I can't see my kids." And he'd say, "Yeah, they're due for some rewards, too." And then he'd say something that always caused me to have a new problem. He'd say, "Ken, maybe you'll get lucky and die tonight." And he'd hang up. And suddenly I'd have a whole different problem. I'd be like, whoa, death is kind of permanent, and that's just the way it was. And I was an alcoholic then, and that's not who I am now. The person I brought to Alcoholics Anonymous, I had to kill, because that person could not stay sober. I love to work with people today who are suicidal. If you're suicidal, I want to work with you. I say to you, what? If you really want to kill yourself, I can help you. All we got to do is these steps. We'll do these steps and you'll get to kill the person that you can't live with. But more importantly, you'll get to see how it turns out. And the nice thing about that is I've worked with some people who are really off the wall. Carol can tell you, they come to the house and, Some of these guys are, they're not the brightest bulb in the room. Most of these guys are out there where the buses don't run. I'm still part of those conversations today. I look sometimes and I, whoa, and these guys have driver's license and they vote. This is scary. But their thinking is just like mine. It is just so bizarre. But the nice thing about it is that as we did these steps, I had that relief that they talk about over and over again in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I did and said all the things that newcomers say and do. Newcomers, when they come in, one of the big things you hear from every newcomer at some point is, I've lost everything. You notice we never go half measure. We didn't lose something. We lose everything. And I have nothing. And I said that too. And now I'm here 36 plus years later, and I'm telling you that the everything that I've lost has turned out to be nothing. And the nothing I was left with has turned out to be everything. That's just the way it works. I mean, you suddenly realize that all the stuff that you thought was important isn't important. 6 years ago, a little over 6 years ago, it came into my mind that I needed to do something dramatic in my life. I'd had a number of things that happened to me that I never really planned on. And I ended up going, I gave away everything I owned, and I went and lived on a Navajo reservation. And people thought, "Ooh, there he goes again." That boy is out there. And I learned a lot from the Navajo. They're very simple people, and I learned a lot. And one of the things I learned is that if you do a rain dance long enough, you'll get rain. And I also learned that when Native Americans only went to the first Thanksgiving. You'll never read anything in the history books about the second Thanksgiving. It's about the first Thanksgiving because the Indians thought it was a going away party. They bought a lot of stuff thinking they were going to say goodbye. They didn't know we were going to hang out here. So there's never no second Thanksgiving. And the other thing I learned is that some of the language of the Navajo has transferred over into our language. The word vegetarian was originally a Navajo word. And we have a lot of vegetarians in California. And vegetarian in Navajo means really bad hunter. So hanging out with these guys was great, I met a medicine man over there, and we went up into the mountains, and we watched the eagles, because the eagle is a precious bird to the Navajo Nation, and they believe that a feather from an eagle, if you have it on a table during a business transaction, you cannot tell a lie, because if you do, you're doomed to a real horrendous life. And so the feather of the bird is very important, but the bird itself is even more so. And I went up into the San Juan Mountains with this Navajo medicine man, and we were sitting there and we were watching the eagles, but then we also started watching these guys down on the San Juan River, right below the Navajo Dam, where they have some of the best trout fishing in the world. And these guys do what they call catch and release. They throw out these things, they catch it, they bring it in and release it. I'm from Brooklyn. We do catch and fillet. So this was a different thing for me. But this guy caught this little fish, and he reeled it in, and the fish was fighting, and finally he got it in, and he took this lure, which was very small, out of the mouth of the fish, and he put it back in the water. And me and the chief, we were sitting there watching it, and it just swam off. And we were so intent on watching it, we didn't see this eagle coming down. And this eagle came down and dropped its talons in the water, snagged that fish, and flew out. And I watched it go. And the chief looked over at me and he said, "Did you ever have a day like that?" And I said, "I sure did. I sure did." where I thought the worst of it was behind me, and I didn't know I was going into it. Whoa, I was walking away, not realizing I wasn't walking away from the accident. I was the accident. And so the deal is that those kind of things began to happen. This family that was separated, my wife decided I was going down to visit my kids and her out of state for every other weekend for a year and a half, and then she said, you know what, I think this thing may be good for us. We'll give this thing a shot. So we decided to get back together. But I was really not mentally the strongest person in the world at that time. As I said, I got sober in July of 70, and Bill Wilson died January of 71. And so I was about 6 months sober when Bill died. And to show you where I was at, I called my sponsor up and I said, ain't this something? He said, what? I said, because they broke Bill's anonymity all over the New York papers. Co-founder of AA dies, and this was already established that they would do this. And so it was in every newspaper. And I called my sponsor and I said, this is really a bummer. I said, this thing looks like it could work for me, and now the owner dies. So I assumed they were closing it down. The owner's dead. They closed down the deal. And he said, no, they're going to try to keep it open for a while. You keep going to the you keep going to the meetings, Sparky. You're doing good now. So this family and I decided that we were going to try to get back together, and we did. And we tried it in the area where I had done my drinking. And when I was drinking, some of the things I did made the newspaper. And my wife and I were walking around like on eggshells with one another, trying to make this thing work. And then one of the kids would come home from school and say, my teacher remembers you, Dad, about this story, whatever the story was. And so we just couldn't get going there. So I did a geographic in sobriety. So in 74, we packed in a car and we drove across country. And I could have ended up in Maui. I really could have. I stopped in San Diego because that's where the ocean was. But if there had been a bridge over here, I would have kept coming. I was trying to get as far away from that area as I could. And the thing was, as we were crossing the country, my sponsor said to me before I left, he said, you're going to need a lot of extra juice when you get out wherever you're going. He said, so promise me you'll go to church. And I said, I'm not big on that. And he said, I know. He said, pick out any church you want and go to it. So I had been raised Catholic, and I was the only one of the kids that didn't graduate from parochial school. I just didn't make it. I got as far as the 4th grade, and I just had some incidents. And so my mom used to always just say, it doesn't bother me that all the other children graduated from parochial grammar school. Kenneth is different. So even in my poor mom, who loved me the best, she knew there were some things that were different. So I said, okay, I'll do that. So as we were crossing the country, we had a little tiny U-Haul attached to the fender of the car, and in Iowa, we broke down. In Des Moines, Iowa, we broke down, and the car started having, the U-Haul started having some trouble. And I pulled into a gas station, and I asked the guy if he could help me out, and he said, no, I can't. He said, but you're really in luck. He said, about 200 yards up the road is the Midwest Regional Service Center for U-Haul. So we went up there, and we had it taken care of, and it was no problem. And then a little bit later on, out towards Grand Island, Nebraska, I had a flat tire as I was pulling into a motel at the end of the day, and there was a garage there, and the guy was able to throw a tire on the car, and there was no problem there. And then we started to run out of gas in this little route we took. We thought, my wife always wanted to go through Colorado, and on the map it looked like a road, but it wasn't finished. So we turned onto this thing, and we were running out of gas, and we didn't know what to do. And we stopped the truck and asked him if there was any gas stations. He said no. He said, but there's a Baptist camp over there. It's getting dark. You can go by the Baptist camp and spend the night, and in the morning maybe they can direct you. So as we started going towards the cross on this Baptist camp, we hooked onto this little gas station that was closed, but it had dollar-operated gas pumps. And my kids had about $6 or $8 from allowance we were giving them, so we put it in, and that filled the tank at that time. And there was just all these things that happened. Then I got to San Diego, and we didn't know where we were going to live, or San Diego was going to be the place. And I went to church on Sunday, and this Irish priest was saying the Mass, and afterward they had coffee and donuts in the rectory, and we went into the rectory, and he said, "Are you going to be in the parish?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "We're looking around." He said, "Well, let me introduce myself. My name is Bill Wilson. Father Bill Wilson." So I said, he said, "If you're looking for a place," he said, "we have parishioners who sell real estate. Why don't you come over to the rectory and I'll give you a card?" And I said, "Great." So I went over and he gave me this card and I looked at it and it said, "Bob Smith Realty." I mean, I'm slow, but Bill Wilson and Bob Smith, So I said to my wife, "I think this is where we're going to stay." And Father Bill and I got to be really close friends, and that was before he even got in the program. It was in 74, and he didn't get sober until 76, and then he became a world-famous speaker, as everybody knows. But the deal is that life just started happening like that. And there was a whole lot of things I won't bore you with, but things began to happen that didn't have good explanations for them. And they just started to happen. And life started to work out. And then after a period of time, my wife and I decided we just needed to go in a different direction. There was no blood to it. There was no bad thing to it. She just wanted one lifestyle and I wanted another. And we went off in different directions. And then a few years later, I had a son who got very, very sick. And it turned out that he had AIDS. And he came home and he stayed with me for 3 months and he died. And during that time, my ex-wife started coming to my house. God has a great sense of humor, I got to meet my husband-in-law, he started coming over the house. And I got to meet him. And the deal is that things just started to happen. And my son, when I was retired, before my retirement went bust and I had to go back to work, I had volunteered in the hospice program. And I had no idea why I had chosen to volunteer in the hospice program. But now, here my son was in that hospice that I volunteered in. And he went in there at the very last few days of his life, and he died there. And I remember him laying in that bed, and I remember him being in a coma, and I remember him that people said he wouldn't come out of that coma, and we stopped all the medication because it wasn't doing anything for him. And he had a moment of clarity, and he woke up, and he knew where he was. And he looked at me and his mom, and he thanked me for being there. And he thanked me for supporting him. And he winked at me, and he said, "I'm good to go, Dad." And when you hear that from a 29-year-old kid who you didn't think would ever go through this, something happens. Something happens. And it certainly happened to me. And from that day on, I committed myself even more so to living my life one moment at a time, always being good to go. And not being concerned with what the events were on the outside, but being concerned with who I was on the inside. And I came to some really great revelations. One of those great revelations is when you have absolutely nothing, that means that God is up to something. When you have absolutely nothing, God is up to something. And you have to let that hand play out, even though it's not the hand you would have chosen. And life has a lot of different roads to it. And if you listen to people in your own home group and people you work with, you'll find out that we all get our share of experience. When the shit hits the fan, it's never dispersed evenly. Some days you're getting my share, some days I'm getting your share, but it's never even. It doesn't go pip 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 pip. It's like woo, and you wonder whoa, if I'm a chosen person, would you please choose somebody else? And God and I had a lot of great talks during that period of time. And, my sponsor is a funny guy. I said to him, last night Doug was talking about the secret, and one guy told him to let go, and another guy said, hold on. And I remember after about 10 years of being sober, I said to my sponsor, you got to tell me what the secret of this thing is. And he said, Ken, I think you're sober enough now to understand, and I'll tell you the secret. So I thought, wow, this is good. And he said, here's the way it's going to work. Someday, somewhere, you're going to be doing something, and you're going to hear someone say, hey, asshole. And you won't even look up. Because you'll know he couldn't possibly be talking to you. You won't even have to look up. You'll just know, oh, yeah, he's talking to somebody else. That's for sure. And I got to hear those great things. In the same way when people used to refer to me in certain ways because we weren't very rich and we were going through tough times as a family. And at that time, Malcolm X was talking in New York, and he was talking about issues other than our issues, but a lot of them were the same. And he had a quote that I remember. It just rung in my ears. And he used to say, it's not about what people call you, it's what you answer to. And I thought, wow, just because someone calls you this, you don't have to answer to it. It has nothing to do with you unless you make it have something to do with you. And the end thing in life is that as life goes on, you get to realize that you don't have to swing at every pitch. You can let some go by. You don't have to get in the middle of all of this and swing at every pitch. You can let some go by. And life takes on a whole different meaning. When my son passed away, my other son went through a real adjustment period. When my wife and my ex-wife and I used to leave the hospital, he would want to stay on the couch. And the nurse said, as soon as you guys clear the door, he climbs into bed with his brother. And she says he stays there the whole night. So I know that things impact people in different ways. And I know that as an alcoholic, we tend to think that we're different than everybody else. We're not really different than everybody else. We just talk about it more. Sometimes you'll hear people say the dumbest things. Like, they'll say things like, well, there's us in here, and then there's the normal people out there. Do you read the newspaper? Do you see what the normal people do? I was behind a normal person in the shopping store, and she was buying mint-flavored dog biscuits. If I want my dog to have good breath, I'll put Levoris in the toilet. I don't, there are no normal people. There are just people who haven't shared with you. And as soon as they share with you, you're going, oh, yeah, because they're telling you what they've been thinking, And the logo for Alcoholics Anonymous is always about more. Our logo here should be excess is not enough. It's always about we need more. And it's never about being in the moment. We always got to be someplace else. Never in the moment. It's like the guy who's in Vegas and he sees this gal and he says, I'll give you $10,000 if you spend the night with me. And boom, they're upstairs in a minute and she says, kiss me on the lips. And he kisses her on the lips. And he says, I don't know. And she says, well, kiss me on the neck. And he kisses her on the neck. And he says, I don't know. And finally she says, kiss me on the breast. And he kisses her on the breast. And he says, I don't know. She said, what don't you know? He said, I don't know where I'm going to get the $10,000. So he's right in the middle of a great thing and he's already projecting the problem, That's the way we think. That's just the way we think, And that's why I love to come and do these things, because I love to hear people laugh, because I know a few things about laughter that most people don't know. And that is, you cannot laugh and think at the same time. It's impossible. So every time you're laughing, you're getting a respite from your favorite topic, which is you. You know, and God knows if you're sitting in one of these seats, you need the break. You know, you really need the break. It's just that's the way it is. You know, the insanity that goes on in our heads, it just goes on, and we think we call it AA thinking. You know, no. No, sometimes you're watching, you go, woohoo, you know, this is really good. You know, particularly when a newcomer is sharing what he thinks the problem is. You know, and everybody in the room is laughing. And he says, you know, I'm really upset. You're all laughing at me. And we say, no, we're not laughing at you. We're laughing at your solutions. You know, like your solutions are hysterical, you know. And I don't know about you guys, but I have come in contact with everything. I've reached the point now where I even like dogs. I never liked dogs. I've been bitten about 4 or 5 times by dogs who were trying to keep me out of places I was trying to get into. And I never liked dogs. And now I like dogs. I was riding down the street in San Diego, and this dog, you know, came running up behind the car. You know, and it was one of those huge dogs, you know. And I said, oh, my God. And I'm thinking, this is a huge dog, one of those sloppy, big dogs, you know. And I'm thinking, oh, my, this is a huge dog. So I pulled over, and I let him catch up with me. And he looked at me, and I looked at him. And just for that moment, we were on the same wavelength. That dog knew me, and he knew I knew him. Because we both had chased after a lot of shit in our lives, having no idea what we were going to do when we caught it. And he was kind of sizing me up and down, and I'm sizing him up and down. And finally I said to him, what now? You know, just what now? And he kind of... I said, hang in there, Tiger, you know, like... Maybe you catch a Volkswagen or something, you know, like coming along here. Something you can handle, you know, like, and that's just the way it is. And I am like at peace with all this stuff. And it doesn't matter what's going on. A couple of years ago, I ended up in the hospital. I was passing out. I didn't know what was going on. It turns out I was bleeding internally. It was caused by drinks I had 35 years ago. And it turns out that I had lesions in my stomach. And I had taken some aspirin, had eaten through those lesions, and I was bleeding internally. And they said, you know, don't worry, we can stop that. We know what that is. That's not your problem. Your problem is, you know, your heart is really in bad shape. So they did a triple bypass. And I was in the hospital for a while. And when I came out of the surgery, in fact, before I went into the surgery, the doctor says, this may not go so well, because if you start to bleed when you're on the table, it's kind of all over. And I said, Doc, there's only 3 things that can happen. I'll wake up and I'll be okay. I won't wake up and I'll go to one of those wonderful places that everybody talks about. Or that place doesn't exist and I won't know it, in which case it doesn't bother me. So, you know, no matter what happens, I'm okay with this. And when I woke up, he came in the room a couple of days later and he said, is your mom still alive? And I said, no. And he said, how about your dad? I said, no. I said, why? He said, I sure would like to meet him. I said, why is that? He said, you have the most interesting family I've ever met. You know, only personal family was allowed in to see me. So I had Mexicans, blacks, Iranians, you know. And he says, you sure have an interesting bloodline. And I said, well, you know, doctor, I have a very enlarged family, you know. And that's the way my life is today. There's absolutely nothing to worry about. You know, I remember going out a long time ago when people I love were dying right and left. And I had a sister who died Christmas of 85, and a brother who died New Year's of 86, a week apart. And then a couple of months later, my mom died because she didn't think her kid should die first. And you know, all the headstones in the cemetery look exactly alike. It has your name on there. It has the date you were born, a dash, and the date you died. And that dash isn't more than 6 or 8 inches on that headstone. And I don't know where you are, but I'm along in the dash, you know. I haven't got time for all this mumbo-jumbo stuff. I haven't got time for people telling me how bad things are. I don't have time for people telling me how things are, the end of the world is coming. Maybe the end of your world is coming. My world's doing pretty good. I go to meetings and I see people every day getting sober, and I don't get caught up in all this other nonsense. And I figure someday, somebody, I don't know who it is, but somebody who's fairly articulate, maybe this Obama guy coming along, but somebody's going to get people to say, you know what? You're Jewish. You believe in one God, right? Good. You're Muslim. You believe in one God, right? Yeah. You're Christians. You believe in one God. Yeah. Supposing you're all right. Supposing you're all right and there's just one God. Then that makes us brothers and sisters. It doesn't make us enemies. And somebody should be able to articulate that clear enough that people understand that they don't have to kill one another. And the reality of that is that we should be getting along a lot better than we do. That's for sure. And you wonder where all this nonsense comes from. He's different, she's different. Hey, the food's great. Well, that's all I know. I don't care who. There are certain meals I'm sitting down, I'm eating. I don't care who makes it. I don't care if I understand what they're saying. I'm eating this food. And it doesn't really matter. And the thing in life is that it gets easier and easier to just live life. I'm really glad that you guys are here tonight, and I'm glad that the committee asked me to come. And I want to tell you that our job on this earth is really very simple. Our job is to take real good care of one another, because we're only on loan. And if you can help somebody, help them. And if you can't help them, then stay the hell out of the way. Don't add to their woe. Try to do something good for somebody. And whenever you get up in the morning, just say, God, I'm here. Use me to any like that you have. Put me in a direction where I can be of service to you. And let me get going. Don't let me. I used to, when I was in a healthier condition, I used to get up and get on a trampoline in front of a mirror nude. And oh, yeah. And I put on the theme from Rocky, and I'd be jumping on that trampoline on da-da-da. Some lady in Nebraska said, did you ever hurt yourself? I said, hell no, that's why God invented masking tape. You just take care of things. And you live life and you don't worry about all this other nonsense and you just get on with it. And if and you watch some people say, are you happy, joyous? Say, yeah, I'm happy, joyous, and free, And you say, my God, they missed their calling. They should have been a hemorrhoid. You just say, life is just too short. Don't waste it. Get out there and do something with it. My buddy Harish, who's Indian, passed away, but Harish used to come into my house, and when he came into my house, he used to say, Namaste, Ken. And when he left, he used to say, Namaste, Ken. And Namaste, loosely translated, means the God in me sees the God in you. And as long as the God in me sees the God in you, then we're okay. We're okay. Everything else is okay. Don't worry about, there's a couple of things if you want to stay sober. I'll give you a couple of hints. Don't scratch shit that don't itch. And when you say to yourself, I can't do anything about this, listen. And if someone says they have a good idea, give them some room. Give them some room. Get out of the way. Give them some room. It's going to be needed. And don't allow perception to rule your life all the time. Perception is a wonderful thing, but it rules our lives in some cases. And try to transfer all that negativity into positive. Just transfer it into positive. I know a guy. He said to me, my wife told me she's cutting me down to sex once a month. He said, but I'm not even upset because some guys she's cutting out altogether. So that's the kind of attitude you want. You want to be a positive person. So look at the person sitting to the right and to the left of you, and after the meeting, give them each a hug because they need it. And you get a hug from them because you need it. And remember that everything is okay regardless of what you're thinking. God doesn't need your help, really. And there's nothing to get done because you got all eternity to do it. So pace yourself. Just don't be doing this stuff. And remember, take real good care of one another. I love you very much. Namaste.